Now I'd like to invite Professor Michiko Nakhara to give us a lecture on all violence against women in war is a crime against women. The message from the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal 2000 and the situation today. I think a lot of us in the room already know Professor Nakhara. She is the co-chairperson of VALNet Japan, which stands for Violence Against Women in War Network. She's also the Professor Emerita of Wasedade University, and she has continued her speaking out as an academic since her retirement on places like Peace Boat, which is run for Japanese youth. And also in Australia, she came to campaign with FCWA in 2008. I heard recently how an activist has commented on her long-standing commitment to the issue, how when she first started her hair was all black, she was 20 years younger, and now as we can see all of her hair has turned white. But rather than reflecting on her age, I think that reflects on the persistence and the commitment of Professor Nakhara's work and her colleagues and other activists working on this issue. So please invite her up to the podium.
After big lunch and singing and dancing, this is the time of nap. So, and so I just forget, introduction. But thank you very much. Nice, very kind introduction. But I am here as a just activist, not academic, and because I prefer that title, I love it. So, but I was asked to talk about the tribunals. So the Japanese, that was like 1991. The Japanese women became aware its real significance of Japanese military sexual slavery. In December 1991, the 3 Korean women who were forced to work as Japanese military comfort women filed suit in the Tokyo District Court. One of the 3 women, Kim Hak-sun, broke more than 46 years silence. And she said, look, I am an ex-comfort woman. And for the first time, the Japanese people faced the comfort woman in person, a woman with a name and face. It is the dignity of human being, her future, her happiness, and the whole her life, which is violently destroyed by the Japanese Imperial Army. So her message was the beginning of many activities, including academic research in Japan. So there are 9 lawsuits by the comfort women in Japan from 1991 to 2001. So every lawsuit was rejected at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court tended to act more politically. So we knew the result. The Supreme Court, we knew they rejected all cases. So in that sense, 9 lawsuits were rejected. But important thing, among 9 lawsuits, 7 district court and 6 high court acknowledged their damages by the Japanese Imperial Army. So the legal acknowledgement of the damage of the comfort women is important step to appeal the Japanese government for historical and moral responsibility. That is the Japanese government's recognition of their crimes against women, the formal apology and compensation. So, Women's International War Crime Tribunal on Japan's military sexual slavery in Tokyo in 2000. So after 1991, many Japanese women started their activities to support women in different countries and to do some research and in various countries, and also invited many women to Japan. And Japanese women started to learn from these women. So there were 9 lawsuits by the comfort women demanding recognition of historical facts such as kidnapping, rape, compulsion, illegal confinement, forced labor without payment, and abandonment after the war. Formal apology of the Japanese government and compensation during 1991 to 2001. So we Japanese women want us to try the crime of Japanese Imperial Army. So one of the leading figure, Matsui Yayoi, she started to call, let's have a women's tribunal. And this is the beginning. So the Barnet Japan was organized, and Japan and Korean Council and Ascent, Philippine organization. So 3 organizations started to work together. And also, besides these 3 NGO groups, in the world, there are many women cooperate us. Otherwise, it is impossible to organize such a huge international tribunals, because we invited 4 judges. These judges are real judges. They are working in ICC and also other international courts. But when we started, there were very strong opposition, not only right wings, but including feminist scholars and also other NGO groups. Maybe one of the reasons is we try Emperor Hirohito. Emperor Hirohito is still very, very strong taboo. So every time we organize some lecture on crime of Emperor Hirohito, we were attacked by right-wing, very violent right-wing groups. Now we know the face of individual right-wing people. And we have a photograph, so we know them. But now, a more dangerous thing is we call network, net right wings, because they send some information about our activities through net. So faceless, hundreds right wing attack us. So now it's a more dangerous situation. But anyway, and also to the Japanese, we say we will try, we will punish the criminal, because personally, I started this movement with strong anger against anyone who destroyed whole life happiness, future of individual woman. So so that's why we have to try and punish crimes. But most Japanese people don't like punishment. Why? You don't have any power. And it happened many years ago. Why you criticize old men who went to war to fight a painful war? Why you criticize all these old men? So the Japanese, really don't like to try. It's quite different from Germany. Germany, still they arrest criminals and punish criminals, but not like in Germany. And so we are just faced right-wing attack and also many, including NGO, the feminist scholars, and the criticisms. So, but anyway, we organized Women's International Tribunal in 2000. So, there are many messages, but I think very important message. I pick up some, and I cannot pick up all of them. So the tribunal was held from 8 to 12 December 2000 in Tokyo. It said the tribunal is the culmination of nearly a decade of work by and on behalf of the victimized survivors and on behalf of the victims who have not survived. The tribunal was established as a result of the failure of states to discharge their responsibility to ensure justice. So the message of the tribunal, before I discuss the message, I'd like to draw your attention to the concept of law. After the Second World War, Japan was, Japanese crimes was tried at the so-called Tokyo tribunals. This is an international criminal tribunal for the Far East because Japan was defeated. So important issues were never being tried. I think the two important issues. One is crime of Emperor Hirohito, and second is crime against women. So two things. There were enough evidence, but still never been tried at the Tokyo Tribunal. And so this is the beginning of history after the war. So Japanese government, especially the Ministry of Education, tried, they made and still making great effort not teach modern history. So they started to teach thousand years ago. And then when they reach maybe Meiji period, 1890, and then they taught glorious modernization. We opened the door to international societies, not like China or Korea. We are modernized own country successfully. So the glorious history ends there. So the children don't know what Japan did afterwards. They don't teach. We invaded other countries and we colonized other countries, exploit them, and also during the wartime, 1932 to 45, there were sexual slavery. And that government didn't teach. So this is our duty to organize, Tribunal. So we learned international law, but international law, we could not find any proper law to try and punish criminals for, how to say, Japanese sexual slavery. And the international law, we learned, reproduced Western value and male-centered value system. So there were 12 judges in the Tokyo Tribunal, but all of them were male. So the existed international law at that time did not recognize a sexual crime against women in war is a crime against individual woman. It was a crime against the honor of family. That's a Geneva Agreement. So if one woman experienced sexual abuse, this is not crime to this woman, but her family, honor of her family. So that is the international law. So since then, I always just imagine in, how to say, reality. So international law, the concept is very ideal because they cross borders, cross national government. So we thought more human legal system, but actually not. Then I just imagined, well, in some European country, look at that building in the office, European man drafting the law. He never learned any gender studies. And these people making law, they made international law. So that's why we thought we have to make own law. So we created a charter of the Women's Tribunal. So that's the beginning. So the first message is, historical recognition. And so this is it is important to prove that women were forced to work as sexual slavery by the Japanese army and confined in this confrontation against individual free will. Most women were kidnapped or deceived. So there are many ways, maybe the poor parent sold daughters, or some women were ex-prostitute. But the important thing is they were forced to work as, well, against their own will, and no freedom because they were confined. So they could not, run away. They couldn't say no. So that's why Gay McDougall, Special Rapporteur of United Nations Human Rights Committees, called confrontation as rape center. So that's the exactly right name. These are rape centers. So that's the first message. And then second message is recognition of the notion that the violence against women in war is a war crime and end of the culture of this impunity. So in histories, many crimes against women, many violence against women in the war, but always, maybe any countries, well, it happened during the war. Boys always like that. So there were law against such crimes, but they've never been punished, rarely punished. So this impunity, like a chain of impunity, continued until today. And so that's why the second message is end the chain of impunity of crime against women in war. And the third message is punishment of criminals. We tried Emperor Hirohito. So Emperor Hirohito, well, sexual violence against women is epidemic. It's spread if you don't punish. So then you might think, why Emperor Hirohito? But Emperor Hirohito was the head of state of Japan and the supreme commander of the armed forces until 1945. So he is the only person who ruled Japan, and he's the only person who gave order to any army. So his political power was independent of and superior to the legislative, judicial, and administrative power of Japanese government. Nobody say no to the emperor. So, for example, like a Tojo, Prime Minister Tojo, so during the Tokyo Tribunal, he was asked, and then he answered, I am a loyal subject of Emperor Hirohito. I never said no to the emperor. So, because he's a royal, yes. But someone listened to his answer, was shocked. And so he went to Tojo, oh, please change your answer. So if he say, he's a prime minister, and if he say, I cannot say no to the emperor, so the responsibilities goes to emperor. So during the tribunal, it would happen. So Tojo was forced to change his answer to protect the emperor. So emperor sacrificed all his loyal subjects, generals, and then until today, he was not guilty at all. He never take any responsibility of war. So because of the American policy, the political reasons. So like if we look back, the Hitler committed suicide. Mussolini was hanged. But Emperor Hirohito, nothing happened to him, and even after the war, he continued to be ahead of the country. And I was born 1934. So I saw emperor before the war with a military uniform and riding on the white horse. After the war, I saw emperor at the ceremony of new constitution. And he was wearing nice, plain clothes and looks very gentle old man. So that's such a change. I couldn't believe. And I was a small girl, and I joined some parade. So Emperor Hirohito came out from the palace on the carriage. And I was so small, so just I looked at the emperor. Where is the emperor? And when I went home, my mother asked me, did you see emperor? And I answered, yes, emperor wear very glorious hat and nice golden buttons and the coat in the uniform. My mother said, what a fool, he's a footman. Footman is you understand what I explain? Just the back of the carriage, footman and standing and to take care of the emperor, and not emperor. So emperor is in plain clothes sitting inside the carriage. that I never imagined emperor in plain clothes. So that's the great change. Emperor is a good actor. So that we tried emperor. So that's why the later, I think you saw the film in the morning. So when a judge said emperor is guilty, all people just stood up and clapped hands. And the right wing saw that film at the one meeting, at the NGO meeting, and he got angry. He just threw his can to woman. So woman was cut in the face. So, and she's very brave. She brought the case in the court. So she won, woman won. But always right-wing opposition is very violent and very dangerous. So, and then the last message I'd like to add, because justice for the Japanese comfort women. There were Japanese comfort women, but there is only one Japanese comfort woman who spoke out. So there are many Japanese comfort women who have worked under the licensed prostitution before the Asian Pacific War. So many Japanese comfort women were recruited from the prostitute. So that's why it's very difficult to speak out. So, judge said, while the military did recruit some former prostitutes into the comfort women system, the evidence shows that once part of the system, the former prostitutes suffered the same slave-like condition as the other women. The expert testimony indicates that Japanese licensed prostitution were not free to refuse to become comfort women, or once a part of the system, they were not free to dictate the nature or terms of their service or to leave. So at the beginning, because there is no witness, so the many Japanese activists don't want to touch the issue of Japanese comfort women. But now I think it is also important because we can cross the border, and because they are same women like us. So the tribunals, of course there is no actual power, but send a very strong message to the people. So, so after the war, well, after the tribunals, there are many organizations. In the morning, Ms. Watanabe explained lots of activities. One thing I would like to mention is Ms. Watanabe was working at WAM, Women's Exhibit Museum. When it was started, no newspapers reported. I was in London. I was watching TV, and 7 o'clock BBC News. It had reported in Tokyo there was a new museum, very tiny museum, but specialized in the comfort of women. So I'm so surprised Ms. Watanabe was interviewed by the BBC reporters. So at least British people who watched that news, they received the information, but Japanese didn't. So that's the situation. So one thing I'd like to mention is this tribunal certainly sent message to many countries. And at the same time of the tribunal, we organized a public hearing. So public hearing of contemporary war crimes. So the many women from many countries who were raped, who suffered violence by the army, police, and other people, came to Tokyo, and they told stories. Among them, there was a woman from Guatemala. So she was a student, and she just handed out the information of their gatherings, and she was arrested by police, and she was gang raped by police. So she's one of many victims, but she saw the tribunal, and she just she decided her mind one day, we'll try criminal in Guatemala, criminal who violated women's human rights. So it takes many years, well, almost 9 years. So after Matsuyeri passed away, she left certain amount of property, and so we organized an NPO, and NPO has 2 jobs. One is Women's Sex Museum, and another one is yearly award. This award is NGO women gives any woman in the world who worked for other women. So until today, the many women from Nepal and Koreans and Koreans who are fighting against the American base, and so anyway, this woman from Guatemala, when she returned to Guatemala, she organized the women's organization. And so it continued that movement, and they applied for yearly award 2009, last year. And that movement is, we gave yearly award to them. The project from victims of sexual violence to actors of change, women's struggle for justice. So the message from the tribunal, that finally someone inherited. So this group is, I like the concept. I'm one of the selecting committee members, and any woman from the beginning is a victim. But will you stay as victims forever? One day you have to stand up. So one day you become actor. So these Guatemala groups, the movement is from victims to actor of change. So last year, finally, they organized a People's Tribunal to try violence against women in Guatemala. So certainly they received the message of the tribunal. So this is so there is the yearly award. So if you know any woman who worked for women, and please apply. Well, this is advertisement, and so then well, there are many activities, but I think no time. So so I will end. But if you read Japanese, I have some the materials. So please come to me. So and finally, I'd like to express my sincere congratulations to the Korean Council, which is prepared the 20th anniversary in November. So voluntarily representing the Japanese women, I really would like to congratulate. And also, we, after 10 years of the women's tribunals, we are also preparing the anniversary symposium, international symposium, and 5th of December. So the struggle should still be continued. We never give up the victims' demand for official apology, official recognition of the crime, and compensation forever. So anything we can do, we do. We constructed a monument in Miyako Island, tiny island in Okinawa. There were 17 comfort stations, as many Korean Taiwanese women were there. So there is nothing bury the woman's memory. So memory survived forever with them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nakahara, for the inspiring speech and helping us not forget the great work that's been done with the Women's Tribunal 10 years ago. The next speaker for us is Professor Lee Na-yeon from Korea. She is currently an assistant professor of sociology at Cheongyang University and also current researcher for War and Women's Human Rights Center at Korean Council. She has previously taught at George Mason University in the US, and her research interests focus on how colonialism, nationalism, and/or globalization constitute gender and sexuality. She has published a number of articles in Korea and the US, such as Historical Formation and Implication of the Women's Abolitionist Movement Against Prostitution in Korea, and the construction of military prostitution in South Korea during US military rule, 1945 to 1948. And in the last couple of days, there were discussions about how this sounds very theoretical and academic and so forth. But I think having heard Professor Nakahara's mention of how before all of this work, and especially the Women's Tribunal came about, violence against women were often misunderstood in society as dishonoring of her family or her society or her nation. And I think for a long time, this issue of the comfort women also was misunderstood that way. And in fact, we, in the activism that we've done, have established an understanding that it's a women's human rights issue. So I think, despite her concern, Professor Lee's presentation will be very relevant to all the discussion that's happened so far today. So please welcome her to the podium.
Okay, let's move on to my presentation. The title is a Post-Colonial Feminist Reading on Comfort Women. Because I myself regard myself as a post-colonial feminist. So that's why I would like to see our history and the subject of women from post-colonial feminist perspectives. So my question is, can we move beyond the boundaries of colonialism and nationalism, which is today's talk. Okay. This is my paper's content. Okay. Since the late 1980s, when the issue of Korean military comfort women began to emerge in the public space, the subject and object of comfort women have been traveled the world across boundaries of the nation-state, academia, activism, and discipline. Two governments of Japan and Korea, journalists, activists, scholars, and mass media as main commentators engage in discursively constructing issues, truths, histories, and personal experience of so-called comfort women. Moving backward and forward, and facilitating between very dichotomous divisions, the body of comfort women has been recurrently constructed across time and space. In the meanwhile, some of the important questions were raised concerning imperialism, colonialism, nationalism, and patriarchy, particularly focusing on the war crime, women's rights, state sexual violence, unresolved colonial history, and memories. Laura Hyun-hee, Korean-American feminist, to fundamental inquiry into positionality of the nation-state, meaning of nationness, relationship between gender and nation, woman and state, and a marked subject who speaks to and speak for comfort women situated in the post-colonial setting of East Asia. This paper is not about a historical facts to be unearthed, nor about palpable experience of comfort women, but instead, it is a dialectical and epistemological discussion about how we encounter the issues accompanied by the continuing crisis of domination, coercive and consensual, and how we rewrite different histories in the era of postmodern so-called late capitalist and or post-colonial world, which is still repressed and project its ghost originally produced in the pre-modern and modern capitalist and colonial context. This is an attempt to look for traces of haunting around you and me, and a question about the existing boundaries to move beyond the past in present as well. And also, it is my response to current academic debate over feminism, nationalism, responsibility, reconciliation, and historical inheritance. Actually, 2 days ago when I arrived here, I visited the gallery of art, and I saw astonished original paintings and photos. So one of them was depicting kind of ghost image of original people, which is very related to my subject today. That's why I was very surprised. So my point is that how we encounter the ghost still haunting us. The issues of comfort to women, 위안부, were publicized by several feminist scholars who collaborated with the Korean activist women's movement in the late 1980s, which led to the establishment of 정대협의, 한국정신대문제대책협의회, the Korean Council, very short for the women drafted for sexual slavery, in 1990. Since then, 정대협 has led the movement as an umbrella organization composed of many Korean feminist organizations. Due to the rigorous activism of 정대협 and the first woman's coming out, Kim Hak-soon, in 1991, issues concerning comfort to women could garner public attention throughout the world. However, silence has been the common feature in both nation-states of Japan and Korea for around half a century, as you know. Why had it been remained entirely ignorant, even in Korean society? Then why and how did it come out to the public, breaking the silence? Actually, I'd like to skip the colonial history and the historical, construction of the system, comfort system, because a lot of people here already mentioned about it. And also, I just kept some analysis on the reason of the construction of comfort women's station, because also you may know some of them. So I just add on one analysis to your perspective. I argue that the comfort women system functioned as one of the most important strategies of the colonizer to control the colonized, as binding a range of difference and discrimination that inform the discursive and political practices of racial, sexual, and cultural hierarchization. For Japanese, not to mention material and physical violence against a colonized woman, the symbolic parallel between the violation of a comfort woman's body and the domination over the enemy on the battlefield or through colonial institution is obvious. In fact, the ideology of masculinity is interestingly interrelated with the racism and the nationalism through such a systematic rape over the colonized women's bodies. The conquest of another race and the colonization of its people often rhetorically produced a simultaneous demasculinization and feminization of the colonized. Sexual abuse of the bodies of women belonging to the conquered national, which means Korean, symbolizes the dominance of the conquerors. Therefore, it is necessary for the colonial state to symbolically identify its men, Japanese soldiers, as a colonizer, and women, Korean women, including other colonized women, as object to be sexually conquered in order to legitimize its colonial occupation, domination, women as object to be conquered, and exploitation over the effeminized nation, the colonized inferior Korea. To Koreans, in this sense, the comfort woman was a symbol of the helpless impotence of Korean men who could not protect their own women, families, and nation. Korean virgins who were collectively raped by the colonizer enemy Japan symbolized the raped nation for Korean men. Such historical memory, which is deeply embedded in Korea's national consciousness, still remain a national trauma that has long haunted Korean society. Since the 1990s, the comfort woman's body have been reappropriated by Korean nationalists after the existence of comfort woman was publicized by the Korean women's movement. Coinciding with Korea's anti-American nationalism, particularly due to the Korea's democratization movement at the time, a collective figure of comfort woman began to appear to the public discourse. I just want to skip the editorial writing released from one conservative newspapers. While the Japanese government continued to reject historical fact of the existence of comfort women with the denial of its legal responsibility, some Koreans, including people in social movement, mass media, and the intellectual communities, mobilized the national sentiment of unity against Japan's immorality, utilizing the dichotomous division between us and them, comrade and enemy, victim and offender, and good and bad. To disclose the truth, thorough apology, compensation, national pride, our chaste girls, and/or enforced sexual slave were most commonly employed phrases, waived particularly through media editorials and progressive activist articles. As Yang Hyuna, a Korean feminist, indicates, such a focus gives too much agency to Japan by ceding to Japanese historians the authority to tell the truth, and reveals how a political dimension, such as the economic concerns of the Korean government, operate in such discourses. In the process, the experiences of colonized Korean women have been trivialized and exploited even as a mere material. Comfort women remain as mere victims of empire without agency to control their own lives through the representative symbol of exploited sexual slaves. Such a stereotypical identification is only the problematic process of access to an image of a totality. In this sense, androcentric nationalist discourse is neither about nor for the comfort woman herself, whose position is neither subject nor object. Women are misplaced as the material or simply the ground for man's talk. Through the man's talk, the military comfort woman issue no longer between Korean women and Japanese men, but between Korean men and Japanese men. Feminist scholars have pointed to general tendency in national narrative to recognize only modest and chaste women as symbols of the national collective identity or bearers of the collectivity honor. Because sexually fallen women, particularly those violated by foreigners, represent shame to national dignity or national pride. They are usually excluded from the national community. Yet at the same time, masculinity is measured by its ability to defend the feminine that stands for the nation. The effeminate male, who is not capable enough to protect a woman, represent the effeminized nation itself. Here then lies the paradox of nationalism. The nation simultaneously represents masculinity and femininity, which means that gendered images do not always operate in national narratives in the same fashion. When the nation is defined as an object to be protected from other nations' threat, the nation itself becomes feminized in a fashion that mobilizes national sons to defend the motherland, where their girls, daughters, wives, and lovers, mothers, who should be protected. Thus, national dignity must be recovered by reconfirming the nationalist masculine obligation to protect one's own woman against assault by foreigners, enemies. As Cynthia pointed out, quote, becoming a nationalist requires a man to resist the foreigner's use and abuse of his woman, end quote. Even though nationalism typically has emerged from masculine memory, humiliation, and hope, and even though women's experiences have rarely been included as the basis of nationalism, nationalism spontaneously needs a catalytic, kind of a medium to fuel national sentiment. Therefore, the feminine is contradictorily deployed in accordance with the shifting national interest. The allegory of comfort woman, in this sense, is arbitrarily utilized in accordance with the national interest, which related to the politics of inclusion and exclusion to constitute national history. Comfort woman's experience, voice, or body, which used to represent national shame and should be hidden from the official national history, became visible. Only when it was needed to mobilize feeling of national unity against Japanese imperialism and to recover Korea's national pride, 민족의 자존심 in Korea. Moreover, such abrupt high visibility of comfort woman actually rendered them invisible. According to Avery Gordon, quote, hypervisibility is a persistent alibi for the mechanisms that render one invisible, end quote. With the hyper-invisibility of the collective image of a forced victim of the Japanese, Korea's patriarchy complicit with the Japanese colonialism becomes invisible. Only the archetype of comfort woman remains. Women's experiences constituted by intersections of ethnicity, class, gender, and sexuality in the context of Korea's colonization are erased. Particularly confronted with Korea's civic nationalism, Japanese state nationalism, many Korean feminists attempt to deconstruct an ethnocentric and androcentric national narratives of comfort women. and to reconstitute it from feminist perspective. Yang Hyuna located the comfort woman issue at the intersection of state, race, class, gender contradiction, while differentiating the collective rape in the other war occurred in other places. From the cases of Korean comfort women under the Japanese Empire, Yang Hyuna argued that the project of comfort woman should be understood as one of the genocidal aspects of the Japanese Empire project. Under the slogan of so-called Great East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere and called One Body and One Family under the Japanese Empire. And at the same time, would not be effective without the pre-existing patriarchal social practice inside Korea. As such, Korean feminists try to conceptualize visibility as a complex system of permission and prohibition, punctuated, alternated by operations and historical blindness. Not just the backward colonial history, the continuing mechanism of the dialects of visibility and invisibility have been an object of feminist intensive inquiries. In the meantime, women activists of 정대협의, ironically but naturally, began to recognize the limits of the nationalist narratives. The process of conscious raising that rooted in shared commitment to struggle against androcentric nationalism and Korea's patriarchal practices enabled women activists to shift their collective identity of activists into feminist activists, and to redirect the movement activism more toward the gender issue. For example, women and war crime, state exploitation, women's sexuality, etc., intersected with nation, class, and ethnicity. However, such feminist endeavor unfortunately faced a controversy and dilemma, particularly after the publication of Park Yoo-hwa's book, Titles for Reconciliation, textbooks for woman Yasukuni Tokuto, which was originally published in Korea and then translated into Japan in 2006, when the atmosphere of a conservative right wing became increasingly dominant in Japanese society. Even though some feminists in Korea have quite often, as I told you today, criticized the Korean androcentric nationalism and ambivalent Korean government policy and attitude toward comfort women, the related controversial debate had been circulated within feminist arena and within academic spheres across nation state. On the contrary, Park's argument ignited the international debate on nationalism, particularly between Korea and Japan, with regard to the matter of comfort women. According to her, the form of solidarity between Japanese and Korean people's organization turns blind eyes to Korean nationalism. And activists and feminist scholars both in Japan and in Korea close up the door to reconciliation. Moreover, she argued that the way of movement to urge the fundamental apology cannot, quote, lead to the solution of the problem, but to bring about more antagonism, end quote. Sympathetically responding to Park, Yasuyaki Onuma, one of the most influential scholars of international law in Japan, published a book in 2007 titled What Was the Issue of Comfort Women? Advantages and Disadvantages of Media and Joint Government. Agreeing with Park's argument that Japanese NGO and feminist scholars have feared the anti-Japanese nationalism in South Korea, Onuma's main criticism is against Japanese activists, including yourselves, I think, scholars, who have been against the Asian Women's Fund or National Kokumin Fund of Asia Peaceful Women, as insisting on the moral responsibility superior to legal responsibility. More importantly, Onuma's book title, translated in Korea, is Japan Want to Apologize. Military Comfort Woman and National Fund signify that Korean feminists and activists are a main barrier to move beyond, despite Japan's endeavor for reconciliation between two nation states and between the past and the present. Accordingly, the focus of debate on imperialism, colonialism, patriarchy, and gender nationalism, blah, 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 magically and ironically shifted to the more simplified dichotomous division between legal responsibility and moral responsibility, state responsibility and civic responsibility, and or responsibility and reconciliation. As such, feminist scholars in Korea who have been critical to Korea's nationalism and patriarchal practices confronted the ironical scene that they were accidentally cited by the Japanese right-wing's argument, emphasizing civic and moral responsibility without official recognition and apology, and unintentionally categorized as anti-nationalism. It is a paradox for many feminists who have sought to deconstruct or homogenize the stereotypical image of comfort woman, which not only replicated the master and the subject model of power that reproduced women's identity as a subordinate, but also reflect colonialism that epitomized the self and other model of subject. It is also ironical for them who have been concerned with the sustained mechanism to reaffirm and legitimize a single authority to speak for and speak of the subject of subaltern woman in the post-colonial setting of East Asia. So here I want to clarify the positionality of many Korean feminist activists and the scholars, including me, concerning comfort women, and conceptualizing them, including me, as critical post-colonial feminists against such transnational regime to construct comfort woman. While the term post-colonial premises on the logic of linear temporality signify the closure of a historical period of dependence, for me, post-colonial is a description of current world situation of global capitalism, which serves as the structuring principle of global relations. For Korean feminists, post-colonialism is not a sign for a period of after-colonialism in a linear model of history, but instead, the term signifies the hierarchical relations of dominance, which represent the ideology through which the former colonizing nations expand the political, economical, and military power over the other nations. Therefore, the term post-colonial allows us to understand that colonialism has not disappeared under the late capitalism. It has merely taken new forms. Even though colonization is commonly referred to as consisted of actual territorial conquest and occupation, I regard that colonization takes account of ideas, attitudes, behaviors, and the intellectual practices that consciously and subconsciously reproduce dominant ideologies and political hierarchies. As Chandra Mohanty puts it, quote, colonization has been used to characterize anything from the most evident economic and political hierarchies to the production of particular cultural discourse about what is called the third world, end quote. Colonization in this sense pertains to how dominant systems of representation produce and reinforce mental structures and images to constrain, dehumanize, and disempower particular individuals and social groups. In both first and third world cultures. Accordingly, I argue that both feminists, Japanese and Koreans, are still under post/colonial condition, which bears colonial psychic trait that has been deeply inscribed both in Japanese and Korean consciousness, subconsciousness. What I term the colonized psychic trait refer to the colonization of consciousness including its entailed practices, which can apply not only to the colonized, but also to the colonizer. Therefore, post-colonial feminist perspective asks for looking at colonization of consciousness perpetuated in cultural dependency, colonial subjectivity, identities, or our daily lives in the present. Decolonization would not be realized yet in the post-colonial state relationship, devoid of the process of self-reflective examination and ambivalent consciousness, thought, perspectives, and practices embedded within the subjectivity of I. Okay. Then I want to ask. Sure. Almost done. Then I want to ask, without understanding the post-colonial situation of Japan and Korea, and without the process to activate your and my colonized psychic train, how can you and me move on to the depoliticized, decolonized, and transnationalistic frame of moral responsibility? How we can, without official acknowledgement of the state's structural domination and suppression against the colonized women, how can you and me entail the differential mode of civic responsibility? Without sincere recognition of buried colonial legacies, the residue of our colonial history and your colonial history, which has never cleared at all, how can you and me build up a sincere transnational solidarity? Transnational is not a mere mark to cross over the boundary of nations. It's not a simple solution to move on to reconciliation. Complex power dynamics have been implicated in making the Compo woman as an international matter. Therefore, I suggest the term trans/national. The slash in trans, the slash national indicate both connection and disconnection, as well as continuity and change. Refer to contingence as well as inevitability, contradiction as well as consensus, tensions as well as reconciliation, and disjunction as well as conjunction between among the key actors in reconstructing, deconstructing, or constructing Compo woman. This kind of perspective leaded to caution about translation in cultural and political productions of subject-object Compo woman across time and space. To hear culturally differentiated women and to unearth the historical tragedies inevitably involve translation, because their spatial temporal displacement entail questions about how to encounter and how to communicate with the other. The possibility of perfect translation should not be assumed in cross-cultural, cross-national, and cross-historical communications. You and me should recognize that something will be always lost in translation, particularly in the hegemonic power relationship. Therefore, without understanding the notion of boundary, means the slash here, the rhetoric of transnational is not only hypocritical, but also ethically and politically dangerous. Here I am neither asking drawing of our intense investment toward the back then and over there, nor emphasizing the concrete boundary through which we cannot come across. Instead, acknowledgement of its existence and function is first step to move beyond, quote, Homi Baba opens up his famous book, a boundary is not that at which something stops, but boundary is that from which something begins its presence. Let's conclude. Actually, this is not a concrete conclusion, but I just want to wrap up with the open-ended potential kind of a temporary conclusion. The illusion of I/I means I is I, our own I, which is represented in the narration of repetitive negation, insists that the subaltern Compo woman cannot be spoken, which would maintain the privileged enunciatory position of subject, speaking position of I. The Skoptic desire to look or the position of mastery to know emerges, but at the same time erases in such a re-represented form of performance. Thus, the attempt to represent contemporary reality as perfectly distinct from the historicity embedded within the colonial and post-colonial context are constantly haunted by ghosts, shedding light to the other side of that reality. One needed to be interrogated here and now is who we are, to speak for what, and what effects are produced in listeners, and what effects get stored away to be released in the future. As Avery Gordon insists, quote, being haunted throws us effectively into the structure of feeling of reality we come to experience, not as cold knowledge, but as transformative recognition. Hopefully, you and me here willingly take responsibility to produce a new space that can offer insight about our past in the present with a transformative recognition of the ghost. Since to give forms to the haunted spaces marked by trauma created openings for trauma's productive possibilities, end quote. Acknowledge, face up, speak up for, and talk to them, the ghost, our history song, which is only way to move beyond. Thank you.